recording this little add-on to the beginning. When I'm starting out, I'm actually using a photocopy that I made of my original drawing. So here is another photocopy of that. And I would suggest before you start, because we're going to be using watercolor, just flip that over. Look at that. And just write your name, bottom right-hand corner. Put the bell for your class. And then that'll be there. You won't really be able to add it after you do the watercolor. The other thing that I would also suggest is maybe making your life easier, getting a sheet of cardboard to put this on top of. That way that'll just be ready to transport right over to the drying rack when it is wet. So those are a couple of tips from future me. This video is completing a background for the animal study that we created earlier. So at this point, I'm calling it a study rather than a completed piece because it doesn't have a background. So I'm going to be using one of my graphite pencils. You would probably use your lightest one, your HB, so that you guys can see this. I'll work a little bit darker. I've got the photo of my fake animal here, my toy animal, so you can kind of see how the space looks with the desk there, and then you can kind of see these other desks and things in the background. And then I pulled up some different examples in more natural habitats. So depending on whether the animal is closer to us and there's a lot of other things that are close to us behind it, or whether it's in a more open space, that's going to determine what that background space might look like. So you might see a few different levels of kind of the ground and then more ground, or you might just see kind of one level of the ground and then these other natural objects. So first thing that I'm going to do is separate out that ground space. So it's got to be over where our creature sits. So we've got the feet, but with our creature we also have the tail that's laying on the ground. So the lowest I can put this would be about right here. I guess I could put it right here, but typically a little bit higher. I'm going to create an idea of a ground that is kind of a natural looking ground, so it's uneven. So I am going to darken that up a little bit. So just kind of creating roughly a horizontal line. This would go through your animal, but we wouldn't see it in here, so you can draw really lightly and then erase it, or just pick up your pencil. All right, so that's that first layer of ground. A lot of times you might see your space broken up into a foreground and then maybe a middle ground with another line and then maybe a background far in the distance. So we could do something like that. A lot of these though, you don't necessarily see all that space because these are low to the ground, so you have trees or plants or whatever getting in the way. So I could put in another layer there. And then, you know, if I wanted to, I could try to do another layer. All right, so we're just creating a sense that there is some space. So I'm going to do this in a watercolor wash. So I've got a few different brushes of different sizes. So we've got a large one, and then we've got some sort of small or medium ones. I've also got my paper towel with me, so when we're working with watercolor, we can use our paper towel to blot away color and or water that kind of gets away from us, sort of acts like our eraser. I've got my water, of course, and I've got my watercolor set. All right, so I'm going to first mix my color. Just to have this ready. We're actually not going to put the color on our paper right away. We're going to actually put some water down first for a watercolor wash, but I want to mix my color. So let's say I wanted a brown, but this brown is very artificial looking. So we could use some of these bright colors or primary and secondary colors to mix a brown or brownish gray. So the opposite of the blue would be orange, using our complementary or opposite colors. So we'll get some different variations on brown. I could add a little more blue to that. I kind of like that. You can also mix all three of your primary, so which we kind of did, but yellow and red would make orange, so we could take those and make our orange from scratch. So no matter what two primary colors, or I'm sorry, no matter what two complementary colors you're mixing, you're essentially mixing all three of your primary. So, and just the proportion will get you different shades. So you can mix a few different things up. You could also use the brown that came with that and just try mixing in different colors with that just to get different variations that don't look so artificial. Black is going to be really overpowering, so I would say use that sparingly. In fact, I'm going to move this over here. I could also, I've gotten a lot of these, I've got greens. Again, this green that I have here is going to look really artificial, so I would highly recommend mixing in a little bit of red. So depending on how much we mix in, we'll determine kind of variations of that. Can mix lighter, more yellow greens, but again, to make them look more natural, I would mix in a little bit of red maybe. Also, some of these backgrounds, we've got gray that kind of looks a lot of these like kind of a bluish gray, so you could kind of have these different variations with your browns and blues and whatnot. All right, so I've got lots of kind of natural looking colors if you want to make this kind of a somewhat realistic looking background. And now I am just rinsing off my brushes. I might start with one of my thinner brushes, and I'm just putting water on the paper, and I'm getting this right up to that line. So the idea with a wash is that anywhere where you put the water, that is where the paint will go to. So I'm applying this really carefully with a smaller brush, right up to this line, maybe leaving just a tad bit of space, because sometimes the water does spread a little bit, so if you don't want that to cross the line, I might just leave a little bit extra space, just a tad. Less than a 1/16 of an inch. And this is going to start to dry right away, and it's okay, but we're going to be kind of re-wetting as we go. So notice I'm not going very far from this kind of outline. We are going to get there, but I'm going to do that with the larger brush. So right now I'm using my smaller brush, and I'm just going to stay initially in this front plane that we've marked off, so the foreground. Alright, so once I've got some water there, I can kind of spread it out a little bit. It was sort of standing on the page, so I'm just spreading that out a little bit. And then I can switch to my larger brush. So it might be, maybe for some of these smaller areas, maybe I'm starting with medium brush. But then eventually, once I feel pretty confident that I'm not going to accidentally go over that line, I can use a larger brush. So the water might be starting to dry a little bit, but I'm going to try to connect to all of those areas so that all of this is like one big area that's been dampened with just the water. So we're washing the area with water before we add the color. Okay, so now we might go to one of our smaller brushes. I'm going to choose one of these colors, and I do like to start close to the animal, so start along this line, and you can at this point get right up to that edge. You might want to mix a little bit of some of those colors that you used in there to get it a little bit darker if you need to. So notice how I'm just dabbing. And if you need to switch and get an even smaller brush, you can go back and forth maybe between the medium and the very smallest. And then I'm adding a little bit of water and just spreading this out a little bit. So we don't want the edge of this area with the paint to dry as a hard edge, because that will become a permanent line. So if we had just kind of made part of the area of this background wet and then kind of stopped it, so we did kind of an oval all around it, that edge of that oval would stick and you wouldn't be able to erase it. So see here where it's starting to dry a little bit, so that's where I'd want to apply a little bit more water and have that start to fade out smoothly. So we want that kind of smooth gradation from whatever color you're doing to the white of the page, or eventually we might fill all of this in with the color, maybe a lighter version of it. So just kind of making these little marks, but then we can add a little bit of water. I don't want to go too crazy with adding tons of water, because this paper will start to get kind of weak and it'll degrade. So we want to just add enough water that this kind of blends out smoothly. And I'm going to keep going. So if I have a different variation of brown, that's not necessarily a big deal to me. In fact, I like that because in a natural surface, you do tend to get those variations. And I might be trying to get that a little bit closer up to that line so that it really touches. In fact, I would want to do that. I don't want to have a separation between that line. It might go a little bit over. I wouldn't freak out too much. And I am actually using a photocopy of my original drawing so that if I do make a mistake and it's horrific, I can always go back and make a new photocopy and try again with the background. So again, I'm adding a little bit more water and just spreading that out. I'm being pretty gentle to the paper as I do that. So I was kind of using more of that brown that is from what was just on there, and I actually don't like it as much, even mixed a little bit with some other colors. So I'm mixing up more of that other gray, brown with more of the blue in it. When I am having kind of a bit of a line, I want that to be a horizontal line because that's going to make this feel more like the ground, because the ground is roughly horizontal. So if you use a vertical mark or a diagonal that's steeper, it might not read as really looking like this thing is sitting on the ground or standing on the ground. So again, switching brushes, going from my smallest brush to adding a little bit more water, making sure that this kind of blends out, fades out. We don't want to have that edge stick out too much. And I'm trying to, if it is sticking a little bit, I'm going with those kind of vertical marks because that will make it feel like it is the ground, maybe a shadow on the ground. And I am going to continue this all around because you would see whatever that ground is that your animal is sitting on. You would see it above the body as well as underneath. So this is going all the way up to that first ground line that I drew that represents that foreground. So you may want to make it maybe slightly lighter above to give the impression that underneath the animal, maybe it's casting a bit of a shadow, but you're going to have that same basic color, whatever you've chosen. And then I'm going to make sure that I spread this out. So again, I'm using a lot of kind of like a dabbing motion. And if you see the lines, you want to make sure those look like they are horizontal. So, but I'm not always using as much of a brush stroke as I am a dab. I feel like this transition with the color here happened a little bit too fast. So I'm going to put in a little bit more of that warm brown in some areas down here. Just trying to even that out and again create that look as if maybe there's a little hint of a shadow underneath this guy. A shadow would probably be more to one side than another. So you don't necessarily want that as even all around. So I'm going to have my shadow fall more to the left side here. And I've added a little bit of brown to the other side, but I really don't like that really warm brown that comes with it. So I'm adding more blue mixed in over here. I probably went too blue. So my paper is getting really wet, so I'm just being really gentle, just really dabbing at it. You may see in here, this is overlapping my lizard just a little bit. I'm not going to freak out about that if it's got a little bit of a bleed onto the animal. But again, if it happens too much, we can even start fresh if you need to. So I think I'm going to pretty much call that it. I might want to add a little bit more of the color to these surrounding areas where it didn't spread as much. So adding a little bit more water. So again, my goal here is to have all of this just kind of blend together. I don't want any hard lines anywhere in this area. So I'm trying to create, again, like if I have areas or lines, I want them to feel like they are horizontal. And I'm just dabbing at this, so I'm keeping my brush kind of horizontal and dabbing. If you at any point kind of use the wrong color, or you just have way too much pigment and you want to erase, what you could do, so let's say I decide, oh, on this side it looks too brown, I don't like that. I'm just going to take some of my paper towel. It's got to be pretty fast, it's got to be while it's still wet, otherwise it's not really going to have the impact you want. I might notice other areas that I want to have a little bit darker, so I could go back into those. I will say in general, this is going to dry lighter than it appears at first. So you want to err on the side of it being a little bit darker. And if some areas it just fades to white, that's probably fine, as long as you've got kind of that gradation. So that's our first step. I would actually probably wait until this dries a little bit before coming back to it. If I keep working on this next part while this bottom part is still wet, they are going to bleed together a little bit. Okay, I'm going to keep going with this. I have not really paused to let this dry, so if you do want to try to go on to this next part before letting it dry fully, so if you finish this first part and it's a pretty good time to start cleaning up, then I would just let this dry between class periods. But if you're not doing that because it just doesn't make sense time-wise, you can keep going. I was just using a little bit of paper towel to kind of dry this area up here a little bit along this edge. It's taken us some time to do this background, so this very top area isn't necessarily super wet anyway. So I might, again, before I even start putting any color down, I might mix up what color I want to use first. So I might say, okay, maybe I'm going to make this top area more green. But again, I don't want it to be a fake looking green, so maybe I will mix that green with some of those other tones that I had. Maybe I'll mix it with a little bit of red. Maybe I'll have one over here that's more yellow, but again, has a little bit of brown or red in it as well. just so we've got some variation. All right, and then I am going to just swish my brush around before I use it. So I might, this time maybe I'll start at the top so I don't have as many detailed areas to work around. If your animal is taller and its head and body maybe sticks up more, you might still have a lot of area to work around that's more detailed. So I'm going to go ahead and let this come right up and touch the area I did before. Since it's not super wet, you don't see the color spreading in. If the area down there was really wet still, you might see the color just immediately starting to spread into this second area that I'm painting. And then when I get closer here, again, I'm going to switch to my smallest brush, or my smaller brush at least, and then connect. All right, and then I'm going to apply some of this green that I've mixed up. So I like to have, again, a good amount of contrast right around the animal, so just makes that animal stick out a little bit more. So I started there. Now I had to mix up some more green, and I got maybe too much red in it, so it's looking really grayish. So I can, if I want, try adding some more green right to that. It may look a little bit overpowering though, so it may look a little bit fake. I've got a little bit of green here too that flecked in there. So if I don't like it, again, I can, if I act quickly, I can get rid of that. Or I might just put on top of that put a little more yellow into the color that I mixed, and I'm just putting that in as well. So there we go. So now we've got, and now I put in more of that sort of blended red-green mix. I kind of like that red-green yellow mix to get me kind of a more natural looking but lighter green. So I'm going to use more of that. So I'm just spreading this around. I could add more water to make that spread a little more easily. I'm doing a lot of dabbing. So I personally really like these shapes and textures that the watercolor might create, so I would just leave those. You can even encourage them or make more of them by using your crumpled up towel to kind of create some texture. So I don't like to leave like white gaps generally between different areas. Sometimes it can look kind of natural, but a lot of times it looks, I don't know, forced, or, you know, you can tell that, oh, the artist is being really careful there not to let those areas touch. So you might want to make sure that they do touch a little bit. But sometimes they can also look like, oh, maybe the light's hitting that right there. So just kind of depends. Looks like I got a little bit of bleed up here, so again, I can try to dab that away. So off camera, I'm just mixing more of these different shades of green, trying to get, it doesn't have to be totally consistent, but just trying to get something that will fit in with what I already have. The reason I say it doesn't have to be totally consistent, some people will kind of like really drive themselves crazy trying to match the color exactly. But again, in the real world, that doesn't necessarily happen, especially with natural objects. Even if you're dealing with something that's more of a man-made surface, just the way light is hitting it will make it look different in different places. There's also something called reflected color, which is color of a nearby object will kind of reflect onto the things around it. So if you don't have your colors matching exactly, as long as you get kind of like some kind of somewhat smooth gradation, it doesn't tend to matter all that much. So, and again, I like this texture, so I'm kind of trying to encourage that a little bit. But I'm being very gentle. We don't want to, if you start to see the paper kind of break down with like little balls of white or like little balls of dark color, just give it a rest and you can come back to it later. All right. So again, I would probably want to take a break here. That said, since I'm trying to record this video pretty much in one sitting, we might just take a risk and just see what happens. So I'm just trying to dab a little bit away from this edge. So as I'm dabbing away from that edge, though, I am going to lose some of the color. So that may not be great. All right, I think I'm going to just like live on the wild side a little bit, and I'm going to try doing this last part as well, all in one sitting. So as I touch along that edge, you're going to see a little bit of what I was talking about, where the color, because that's still wet, is going to spread a little bit into this last section. I'm not going to worry about it too much, because really it might just, a lot of times it just sort of unifies your piece, and it really doesn't look bad, especially because of what I was talking about how different colors that are near each other might kind of have this reflective kind of relationship. I'm going to make this part blue. I don't know. I don't really see the sky in any of these, but I don't know. I don't want to do another brown. I guess I could do like more of a yellow or something. I don't know. Might be a little cliche, but I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to do some sky. So I'm actually mixing this as well, so I don't want it to just be like totally just like bright blue. I think it's going to look a little odd, honestly. So I'm letting some of these other colors that I was using bleed into it. So I'm being kind of like very loose with this. So I can dab this on. One thing too you could do is you could actually intentionally leave some sort of like white areas to kind of simulate clouds. Although it can help to look at clouds. Clouds don't necessarily look what like in our mind we feel like they look like. If I go really fast in here and just look for clouds. Kind of help a little bit. Okay, clouds may be, a little more stratified and that kind of thing than you might think of them being. Okay, here we are. So yeah, but if you want to, you can kind of play with that to kind of create these areas that are lighter and darker within this. So I'm using kind of my brush, and I'm purposely kind of creating these, not maybe totally just like puffy clouds, but maybe a little bit more stratified looking. And I don't know, I don't want them to be like too cliche looking, so. So, but I'm just allowing it to have a little bit of variation. So I don't like how it was like a little too contrasty there, so I'm just kind of dabbing and... All right, so maybe enough of a variation to kind of suggest that something's going on in the sky with some clouds or something, I don't know. All right, I'm just going to leave it like that. I do have some bleeding going on. We'll just sort of see how that dries. Yeah. All right, that is the end for now. Okay, I said that was the end. I'm actually going to come back a little bit and just talk about putting this on the drying rack. So I'm really gently lifting this off the table. I may have told you in person to maybe even work on top of a piece of cardboard while you were doing this. But if not, I'm just transferring that right to this piece of cardboard that I brought over to my table, and then this will go on the drying rack. Hopefully you've also put your name ahead of time on the bottom right back side of your painting. So lift this up a little bit so you can see. All right, so there we go. We're just going to take that piece of cardboard over to the drying rack.